So let me start right there with the comments from Ilhan Omar. She has previously accused Israel of, quote, hypnotizing the world. She has suggested that support for Israel in Congress is, quote, all about the Benjamins, meaning all about campaign contributions. And then most recently, she criticized lawmakers who support Israel as potentially having a, quote, allegiance to a foreign country. Is she an anti-Semite?
Well, I was glad that she apologized. I don't believe that she's, in her heart an anti-Semite, but I do believe that those comments gave life to some old tropes, biases against Jews as having dual loyalties or somehow, dominating industries or politics with money. And so I was glad that she apologized. I'm also glad that the House is condemning bigotry. We've seen a rise in anti-Semitism over the last couple of years. We've also seen a rise in anti-Muslim hate and hate directed at others. But yeah, I'm glad that she apologized. I do think that it's fair whether the country is Israel or a European country or a Latin American country for people to criticize or to pick apart the policy that the United States is taking toward that country. Mm-hmm. But it should be done, I think, in a constructive way and not in a way that gives rise to old tropes.
So you suggested that you support the House resolution which condemned anti-Semitism and other bigotry as well. There are Democrats who felt like that resolution was watered down by not focusing on anti-Semitism and not focusing on Congresswoman Omar's comments. Congressman Ted Deutsch, a Democrat from Florida who's Jewish, voiced that concern. Take a listen.
Why are we unable to singularly condemn anti-Semitism? Why can't we call out anti-Semitism and show that we've learned the lessons of history? It feels like we're only able to call the use of anti-Semitic language by a colleague of ours, any colleague of ours, if we're addressing all forms of hatred.
Do you think that House Democrats watered it down? Do you think it was something of a cop-out, as Congressman Deutsch seems to?
I don't think so. I think that there was a lot of talk about anti-Semitism and the rise of it. I think that the vast majority of people in the Democratic Party recognize that anti-Semitism in the United States and also in places like Europe has been on the rise, and that we need to combat that. I think also probably that this was impacted by the fact that Representative Omar apologized for this and said that she should have said that differently. My hope is that apart from this resolution, that we're going to take action in this country to make sure that anti-Semitism and other types of bigotry are not given sustenance. And we have to recognize that we have a president who is dividing Americans along a lot of these lines. And I would like to see us united in trying to offer a different, more positive and inclusive vision for the future of this country.
Let's turn to another issue on those lines, but this is also dividing Democrats on the trail. You've said that there needs to be some kind of reparations to descendants of slaves to compensate for years of slavery and discrimination against African Americans in this country. Take a listen to Bernie Sanders, one of your campaign rivals, at a CNN town hall when it was pointed out that you and Elizabeth Warren support some form of reparations.
What do they mean? I'm not sure that anyone's very clear. What I've just said is that I think we must do everything that we can to address the massive level of disparity that exists in this country.
So what do you mean? Do you think that there should be actual monetary payments to descendants of slaves? Do you support more like what Senator Sanders is talking about, policies such as child care and education that help those who are disadvantaged?
Well, what I said was that that I've long believed that this country should address slavery, the original sin of slavery, including by looking at reparations. And if I'm president, then I'm going to appoint a commission or task force to determine the best way to do that. There's a tremendous amount of disagreement on how we would do that. But let me just say something about Senator Sanders' response there, because he was also asked this question in 2016. Mm-hmm. What he said on The View, I think, the other day was that he didn't think the best way to address this was for the United States to write a check. To my mind, that may or may not be the best way to address it. However, it's interesting to me that when it comes to Medicare for all, health care, the response there has been, we need to write a big check. That when it comes to tuition-free or debt-free college, the answer has been, we need to write a big check. And so if the issue is compensating the descendants of slaves, I don't think that the argument about writing a big check ought to be the argument that you make if you're making an argument that a big check needs to be written for a whole bunch of other stuff.
Interesting.
So if under the Constitution we compensate people because we take their property, why wouldn't you compensate people who actually were property?
Interesting. Very quickly, let's turn to the southern border. The Border Patrol says it has apprehended more than 250,000 people in the last 5 months, almost double the number from last year. The number of families apprehended at the border is up by more than 300% from last year. Now, you have slammed President Trump for his immigration policy. What do you think needs to be done to deter all these families coming in seeking asylum, or do you think they should just be allowed to come in and seek asylum?
Well, under international law and U.S. law, somebody has a right to present himself or herself at the border and to seek asylum. Also, Jake, this is a very important moment. You'll remember that last year, the administration said that they were taking little children away from their parents because they wanted to deter other families from coming to the United States. They said that if we were cruel enough to just take these little children away from their families, that would show all of these other families in Central America that they shouldn't come to the United States. And instead of deterring these families, we actually see more families coming. This is Exhibit A in the grand failure of this administration on immigration. So when people ask, what is the problem? One of the problems is that this administration has taken the wrong path. I think what we need to do in the long run really is to engage these Northern Triangle countries, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and figure out a way to work with them so that people can find safety and prosperity there instead of having to knock on the doorstep of the United States. In the meantime, we ought to follow international law and our practice, which is to allow them to seek asylum when they present themselves.
All right. Very quickly, you know that you are only at 1% in our brand new.
Is that what I'm at?
CNN CNN Des Moines Register
y'all
poll.
I don't even make the cutoff right now when y'all put the graphic on. You gotta take it down to 1%, Jake. All right.
What do you need to do to get that number up? You've been running for president for a while now. Obviously, I mean your favorabilities went up a little bit, so it's not like it's having no effect. But what do you need to do to get out of single digits?
So my favorability over the last, I guess, month and a half went up by 6 points. I got out to Iowa a couple of weeks ago. I'm articulating a strong, compelling vision for the future of this country to make the country the smartest, the healthiest, the fairest, and the most prosperous nation on earth. I can tell that as I spend time in Iowa that I'm going to gain traction. And as you know, if we were to look at any presidential cycle over the last 40 years, oftentimes it's people that have started off at 3%, 1%, 2%, including Donald Trump. At one point was at 1% right before he announced that can win the nomination. And so this is a long road, a long journey, and I'm going to go out there and make my case.